Today, we're exploring the latter half of our history on child stardom, a continuation of the timeline we started in part 1. If you haven't heard that episode yet, you may want to start there. It lays the foundation for everything you're about to hear, from how the studio system industrialized childhood to the systemic patterns that never really went away. Because exploitation didn't leap from Judy Garland straight into TikTok. There was a bridge, a long one, and the kids who walked across it were the child stars of the 80s and 90s. So, before we jump into present day, with ring lights, sponsored childhoods, and algorithm deciding which kids get a childhood and which one gets a brand, we have to make one stop in the middle. This was the era before smartphones, but after Hollywood realized just how profitable childhood could be. A weird in between space where fame was massive, oversight was non existent, and the emerging tabloid machine began treating teenage breakdowns like entertainment. This is where Drew Barrymore was smoking cigarettes in nightclubs at 9 because no adult said no. Corey Haim and Corey Feldman were being passed around by powerful men while the industry looked away. Where River Phoenix was working like an adult before he was old enough to drive. And Brad Renfro was cast out of the police station into stardom and then into addiction before he finished puberty. These kids weren't living in the spotlight, they were living in the furnace. And for the first time in entertainment history, the audience got a front row seat to watch them burn. Because by the mid 90s, a new force entered the equation: the tabloid economy. Now, childhood wasn't just monetized, it was surveilled. Every arrest, every meltdown, every shaved head was a headline. Paparazzi weren't just photographing celebrities, they were hunting them. They were being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for a single shot of a star unraveling. And if the tabloids of the 90s sound vicious, the digital era was about to turn the cruelty into a business model. Because the next shift, the shift happening right now, didn't require studios or clubs or even TMZ. Just required Wi Fi, a camera, and a parent willing to hit upload. Part 2 isn't just about Britney and Lindsay and the Coreys, though they show us exactly how the pressure cooker was heating up. Part 2 is about what happened once the same pressure moved into our homes. Because if the 80s and 90s showed us what happens when children are famous, the 2010s and 2020s show us what happens when childhood itself becomes content. So let's rewind and let's get into it. Let's start with someone that most of us probably know. The Drew Barrymore story is so famous that people probably forget how insane the details actually are. Let's break them open. She was taken to Studio 54 at 9 years old, and the club staff let her in. For context, Studio 54 wasn't just a nightclub, it was the epicenter of 1970s celebrity hedonism, where A-listers danced under glittering lights, drugs flowed freely, and the velvet rope separated the elite from everyone else. It was obviously no place for a child. But they didn't just let her in, they treated her like a celebrity adult. People offered her alcohol because that's what everyone did there. She smoked her first cigarette at age 9, drank alcohol at 9, smoked weed at 10, and used cocaine at 12. These are confirmed ages from Drew Barrymore, not tabloid exaggerations. She was also signing autographs in rehab. At 13, she checked into a facility where staff had to treat her as a normal patient, but not as a public figure. At 13, she checked into a facility where staff had to treat her not as a normal patient, but as a public figure, and other patients asked for her signature there. Talk about identity foreclosure layered with enmeshment. Her mother also took her to clubs as a bonding activity. Drew said that her mother thought it made her seem cool to be partying with her famous daughter. This is textbook parental enmeshment and commodification of the child's social value. So you probably won't be surprised to hear that she ultimately emancipated herself at 14. 14. Most kids that age are thinking about braces and middle school dances, not court petitions for legal independence. She also attempted suicide at 14, and this often got glossed over in public memory, but it happened before her emancipation. She's described it as the moment she realized adults around her were not capable of protecting her. When she left rehab, she couldn't get hired because the industry saw her as damaged goods. She was only 14 and Hollywood had already labeled her washed up. After her emancipation, she had to support herself by working at a coffee shop. a literal household name star taking minimum wage jobs to survive because no adult had preserved a dime of her earnings. So Drew Barrymore didn't just struggle, she survived in an environment that would have killed most adults. Let's talk about the Coreys, one who didn't make it out alive. People know Corey Feldman and Corey Haim stories in broad strokes. Here's the parts that people might not know. Their abusers were not random predators. Many were powerful men working on their films. Some were producers, directors, or people with access to sets, meaning the abuse was almost always happening during employment. Both boys were passed around by a network of older men who targeted child actors. Corey Feldman called it a ring, not isolated incidents. This aligns with what other former child actors have hinted at across the decades. Corey Haim's rape allegedly occurred on the set of Lucas when he was 13, and it was allegedly spectacularly ignored by adults on set who didn't want trouble. With that, studio handlers pressured them to stay quiet. One manager told Feldman it would destroy his image to speak up, using fame as leverage to protect the abusers. And Feldman said his drug use started because adults in Hollywood encouraged it. Similar to Drew Barrymore, drugs weren't rebellious, they were occupational hazards supplied by people who wanted compliant kids. Corey Haim begged for help for years, but ultimately his pleas were dismissed as addict behavior. He repeatedly told peers and friends about the abuse, and adults brushed it off as teen dramatics. Feldman wasn't actually believed for decades. People mocked him for talking about pedophilia in Hollywood until the Harvey Weinstein revelations suddenly made his story credible. And Feldman attempted to create a documentary naming the abusers, but investors pulled out because of legal threats. This shows how structurally protected these predators were. The Coreys, unfortunately, weren't anomalies. They were the canaries in the coal mine. Let's move into childhood stolen in the name of art. River Phoenix. River Phoenix's death is often framed as a tragic overdose, but the deeper story is darker and more culturally significant. He grew up in the cult-like Children of God movement. This meant there was no formal schooling or boundaries or stable caretaking even, and there was exposure to dualization in the group's teachings. By the time he was 4, his family was recruiting other families into the sect. His career began as a way to financially support his siblings and parents. He wasn't acting because he loved it. He was acting because the family was broke and needed a star. He actually had extreme anxiety about fame. He hated premieres and parties and public appearances, and he wanted to actually be a musician, not a celebrity. His vegan, clean-living image masked severe exhaustion. He was performing in bands at night and shooting in films during the day and barely sleeping at all. His fatal overdose was not caused solely by drugs. It was caused by overwork and anxiety and the drug culture around the Viper Room. This was the club that was notorious for hard-partying elites. River took a lethal mix of heroin and cocaine, handed to him unlabeled, in a drink. His brother Joaquin had to call 911, fearing he was dying, and the audio was haunting and ultimately leaked to tabloids. Studio PR teams scrambled to downplay the drugs. They didn't want another coke problem in the Hollywood headlines, just like with Belushi, Farley, Haim, and others. River wasn't a young man experimenting with nightlife. He was a child performer forced into adulthood before he had one. Brad Renfro's story is perhaps the most heartbreaking because it reveals how fast the industry can abandon children. He was discovered at the age of 10, not by an agent, but by a police officer. A casting director wanted a street kid for the movie The Client, so they asked a local police officer if they knew any troubled children. That's how they found Brad. He had no acting training, but he was immediately working with Susan Sarandon and Tommy Lee Jones. The pressure to perform like a seasoned adult started instantly. He worked constantly, without breaks, all the way through adolescence. There were movies and press tours and interviews and no time to be a kid. And ultimately, he tried heroin for the first time at age 12 or 13. This parallels the Coreys and Drew. Again, drugs weren't rebellion, they were a form of relief. Hollywood marketed his bad boy image instead of helping him. The industry loved the gritty aesthetic. They didn't want him sober, they wanted him interesting. He was arrested multiple times before 18, but instead of rehab or therapy, tabloids treated him like a troubled adult. He died at the age of 25, leaving behind a son who was only 4. He was also not included in the Oscars in Memoriam program, which was super heartbreaking and shows that Hollywood literally erased him. Ultimately, these kids weren't destroyed by addiction, they were destroyed by things that were underlying, like parental absence or enmeshment, studio pressure, or adult environments, no boundaries, public humiliation, and unregulated labor, in a culture that monetized breakdowns. Drew survived because she rebuilt herself. Feldman survived because he fought back. The others, unfortunately, didn't stand a chance. Let's move into the 1990s to 2010s. This was where the tabloid era was on steroids. By the 90s, child stardom had mutated again. It wasn't just film sets or TV sound stages anymore. It was the rise of 24/7 tabloid culture, paparazzi economies, and the early internet's obsession with watching young people fall apart in real time. Suddenly, the dangers didn't end when the director yelled cut. The real danger was everything after. And nobody embodied that cultural shift more than Britney Spears. Britney wasn't just famous, she was American girlhood industrialized. By 11, she was a Mouseketeer. By 16, she was on TRL nearly every day, selling millions of albums. What most people forget is that she had already been working for nearly a decade before Baby One More Time. Here are the lesser known pieces. She was performing 6 nights a week on the Mickey Mouse Club. Child labor laws didn't cover the unique, enormously structured demands of the all-new Mickey Mouse Club. Those kids were essentially salaried adult performers with homework. She wasn't allowed to drive alone, even as a global superstar. Disney and early management controlled transportation to manage public image and prevent risk. This infantilization later set the stage for the conservatorship. Her label forced her to do a grueling adult-sized promo schedule at age 16. She performed up to 90 shows in a single promotional year, many involving international travel, interviews, and mandatory appearances with restricted sleep. Paparazzi made up to $500,000 a photo of Britney during the 2007 breakdown. This is why they hunted her like prey. The images weren't just valuable, they were economy-changing. She asked for help multiple times and was ultimately laughed at. When she shaved her head, she told the salon owner, quote, "I just don't want anybody touching me anymore," end quote. But the world had turned that into a punchline. Her conservatorship was rooted in probate law designed for elderly dementia patients. Not pop stars, not mothers, certainly not a functioning adult earning millions. She was a child star who became an adult product and then legally reverted to child status again. This is identity foreclosure, learned helplessness, and state-enforced infantilization. Let's talk about the girl the culture decided to watch burn. Lindsay Lohan became famous at 12 for The Parent Trap, but the lesser-known piece is this. She was already doing modeling gigs at age 3. She wasn't discovered, she was processed. Early. Her father's chaotic behavior was constantly public. Michael Lohan sold stories, leaked voicemails, and gave interviews about her behind her back while she was still a minor. Her mother styled herself as her best friend, creating enmeshment. Dina Lohan partied with Lindsay at clubs, blurred parental boundaries, and encouraged her fame lifestyle. And paparazzi car chases nearly killed her multiple times. One chase ended with a paparazzo crashing into her car and getting arrested. But the story was spun as Lindsay's reckless behavior. And studios forced her to keep working through the physical and mental collapse. During Georgia Rule in 2007, the studio publicly shamed her in a leaked letter, unprecedented at the time, despite knowing she was struggling with addiction and exhaustion. Her downfall was consumed as entertainment because we'd decided young women's pain was fun to watch. Similarly, Amanda Bynes wasn't just any child star. She was the child comedian of the early 2000s. Nickelodeon built entire shows around her timing and charisma. But here's what most people don't know. She was handpicked by Dan Schneider at 10, a man at the center of multiple abuse allegations. For years, Schneider ran the most powerful corner of kids' TV. Bynes was groomed to be perfect. Networks micromanaged her body, her image, her social life. She worked adult hours as a minor. Her shows involved long sketch rehearsals, heavy memorization, and back-to-back tapings, far beyond what child labor limits allowed. But the network found loopholes. After leaving Nickelodeon, she was told she wasn't funny enough for adult roles. This is classic role confusion. She was built for a persona that she was never allowed to outgrow. In her 2012 to 2014 breakdown, it was live-streamed by tabloids. Everything between DUIs, tweets, erratic behavior, it became a real-time spectacle. And she was ultimately placed under a conservatorship at 27. Once again, we see the pattern of infantilizing an adult who had never been allowed normal development. The same public that adored her at 12 devoured her at 27. Let's talk about the escape artist Macaulay Culkin. Culkin's story is often told as he emancipated and got out, but the lesser known truths are what justify his survival being considered an anomaly. His father wasn't just mismanaging money, he was abusive and jealous. Kit Culkin was described by family members as controlling and prone to rage, particularly toward Macaulay, whose success overshadowed his father's failed acting career. And he wasn't just in Home Alone. From 10 to 14, Macaulay starred in 15 films, a workload no adult actor handles without burnout. His parents' custody battle was largely over control of his fortune. He emancipated not to become independent, but to protect his earnings from both parents. He quit acting because he feared becoming another Hollywood corpse. He said in interviews that he left because he saw no safe path forward, and he moved to Paris to avoid American tabloid culture. He wasn't hiding, he was fleeing a predator. Today, surviving is considered a win. The bar is that low. By the time we hit the 90s and 2000s, child stardom had merged with capitalism, children as revenue streams, media surveillance, paparazzi as predators, public schadenfreude, meltdowns as entertainment, and legal structures designed for elderly guardianship. There was also emerging digital virality. Every mistake was amplified instantly. This wasn't a new story, it's a new stage for a centuries-old pattern. The royal courts had jesters, the Victorians had stage children, silent-era Hollywood had Coogan and Baby Peggy, the studio system had Judy Garland, and the tabloid age had Britney, Lindsay, Amanda, and Macaulay. And today, we have YouTube family channels, TikTok kids, and child influencers who work without any labor laws at all, filmed in their own homes, by their own parents, for millions of views. The pattern did not just repeat, it scaled. By the 2000s, the script was already familiar. Child stars rise fast, fall hard, and leave behind cautionary tales. But then came a seismic shift. The internet turned everyone into a potential celebrity. No need for casting calls. No need for studio bosses. If you had Wi-Fi, a smartphone, and a kid willing to smile on camera, you could build your own empire. And millions of parents did. The result, a new breed of child star, the kidfluencer. And in many ways, their world was even less protected than Judy Garland's or Gary Coleman's ever was. Platforms like YouTube and TikTok rewrote the economics of fame. On YouTube, channels earn money through ad revenue. The more views, the more cash. Sponsorship deals sweeten the pot, with toy companies, clothing brands, snack foods, you name it. And TikTok adds brand deals and influencer marketing, with kids pushing products and bite-sized videos. Suddenly, cuteness wasn't just something parents bragged about at family gatherings, it was a business model. Take Ryan's World. Ryan Kaji, a smiling little boy reviewing toys, became one of the highest paid YouTubers in the world. In 2020, Forbes estimated his earnings at $29.5 million in a single year, at age 8. Sounds great, right? Except child labor laws weren't written with YouTube in mind. The Coogan Law, it only covered kids under formal entertainment contracts. Family vlogs and toy review channels slipped through the cracks. There were no rules about how long a child could be filmed, no guarantee they'd see a dime of the money, no oversight to ensure school or socialization came first. In other words, the algorithm became the new Louis B. Mayer, except this time the studio boss was sitting in the family room. And when there's no oversight, some parents will go too far. Let's talk about Daddy 05. A Maryland couple, Mike and Heather Martin, turned prank videos on their 5 kids into a YouTube channel with hundreds of thousands of subscribers. The pranks were cruel. Fake punishments, screaming obscenities, convincing kids that we were being put up for adoption. In one video, the dad smeared fake ink on the carpet and then screamed at his son until the boy was sobbing, before revealing it was all a joke. The children weren't laughing. Nobody was laughing. The viewers noticed, and Child Protective Services noticed. In 2017, the Martins lost custody of 2 of the kids. In 2018, they were convicted of child neglect and given probation. YouTube banned their channel permanently. It was a disturbing reminder that when content is king, kids become collateral damage. But even Daddy O5 wasn't the worst. In Arizona, a channel called Fantastic Adventures had nearly 1 million subscribers. It featured 7 adopted children acting out skits. Viewers saw cheerful kids, but what they didn't see was the abuse happening off camera. In 2019, police arrested the mother, Michelle Hobson, after her adult daughter tipped them off. Investigators found that Hobson had been forcing her kids to perform, using punishments that sound like something out of a torture manual. There were beatings, they were locking them in closets for days, withholding food and water, and even pepper spraying their genitals if they forgot their lines. One child told police Hobson pinched the tip of his penis until it bled. The videos kept coming because the channel was lucrative. Abuse had become part of the production process. Hobson was arrested and charged with dozens of felonies. She died in custody before trial. The children were removed and placed in care, but the fact that this was possible all just shows how unregulated the space was. Now, not every case is that extreme, but even wholesome family vlogs raise ethical red flags. These channels broadcast everything from potty training to tantrums to medical diagnoses, first crushes. Millions of strangers watch and comment and sometimes obsess over these kids. And the problem is ultimately consent. A toddler can't meaningfully say yes or no to being filmed. A 10-year-old can't weigh the long-term consequences of their meltdowns being immortalized on the internet. Many kids grow up resenting it, and teenagers have spoken out, saying they felt bribed or coerced into smiling for the camera. One girl described it as Stockholm Syndrome. She'd been conditioned to perform for her mother's vlog, whether she wanted to or not. And the psychological toll? Psychologists warn it creates hypervigilance, the sense that you're always being watched, always performing, where home becomes a film set and privacy just evaporates. That's not childhood, that's a 24/7 job you never applied for. As audiences caught on, backlash began. In 2020, mommy vlogger Micah Stauffer admitted she had rehomed her adopted autistic son after featuring him in dozens of monetized videos. Sponsors dropped her immediately. Viewers called it what it was, commodification of a child until he became inconvenient. In 2023, the 8 Passengers channel imploded when mother Ruby Franke was arrested for severe abuse. Once hailed as a parenting guru, she was revealed to be starving and physically harming her children. The irony was brutal. Her public persona was about discipline and morality, and her private reality was cruelty. Ruby Franke's eldest daughter, Sherry, testified to Utah lawmakers in 2024. She told them family vlogging wasn't just casual filming. It was a business with employees, sponsorships, and production schedules. She said she lost friends because her life was online, that her private moments were sold to strangers, and she delivered the line that stopped the room cold. There is no such thing as a moral or ethical family vlogger. Her point was simple. Children cannot consent to having their childhood commodified. In any other workplace, that would be obvious, but for some reason, online, people act like it's different. We like to imagine legislation is proactive, but it normally isn't. It's reactive, and it normally waits until someone bleeds. Historically, child labor laws didn't exist until children were burned in factories, crushed under machinery, or worked to death in textile mills. Hollywood didn't get the Coogan law until Jackie Coogan's mother spent his millions and the public got angry enough to force the government's hand. And now, a century later, we're doing the same thing, responding only once things get bad enough to trend. So, what happens when those ring lights and sponsorships finally come under scrutiny? When lawmakers, some of them raised on YouTube themselves, start asking, who protects the kids on camera now? Enter France. Now, France didn't wake up one day and decide to protect the kids. It responded to growing crisis. Children whose entire childhoods were being recorded, monetized, and archived online forever. The law requires permits for filming, limited hours, earnings put into a trust, the right, once they turn 18, to delete the footage that robbed them of privacy. France essentially admitted, we gave you the internet and we forgot to give your kids rights. Illinois went further. Kids under 16 can now demand a share of the revenue, deletion of videos, and the ability to sue their parents. Picture that, a child turning 18 and legally confronting a parent over childhood videos that made the parent thousands of dollars. That's not a normal developmental milestone. That's relational trauma being litigated. California extended the Coogan protections to kidfluencers, admitting that a ring light is just a modern studio lamp. A parent holding an iPhone can still exploit their child, and a monetized Instagram reel is still labor. The law requires platforms to cooperate with takedown requests, but here's the catch: no one knows how to enforce any of this. Parents can find loopholes by filming fewer videos or fewer minutes per video, spreading content across multiple accounts, moving to a state with no regulations, or claiming the child volunteered. And no law, none, can repair the psychological consequences of being your family's content. This takes us straight into the psychology. Kids being filmed constantly is not just annoying, it's developmental sabotage. Adults can compartmentalize. Kids can't do that yet, and their brains aren't finished, so everything becomes wiring. Let's peel back the layers. Hypervigilance is a trauma response, a nervous system always on standby. In influencer households, kids learn early not to cry too long because the camera might be rolling, not to make a mess because mom's filming a cleaning reel, not to say the wrong thing because the audience is watching. A child who's always being watched becomes a child who never stops scanning the environment for cues. This is the same psychological pattern we see in children of unpredictable parents, kids in highly controlling religious groups, and survivors of inconsistent caregiving. But now it's tied to something more insidious: performance as a survival mechanism. Attachment theory says children build trust through repetition. You cry, your parent comforts you, and then the world is safe. But in influencer households, the sequence changes. It's you cry, the parent says, "Hold on, let me record this," and then the world is content. This rewires the core relationship. The parent child bond becomes transactional and staged and curated and rewards driven. When your parent is also your camera operator, the safest person in your life becomes someone who benefits from your vulnerability. That's not just exploitation, that's attachment damage. So, we talked about James Marcia's theory earlier: committing to an identity you never chose. For influencer kids, foreclosure happens before they can even spell their own name. You're the funny one, you're the grumpy one, you're the picky eater, you're the big sister who always helps, you're the tantrum kid. People love that. These labels become brands. The child becomes a character. Their personality becomes intellectual property. And what happens when the audience grows bored of that character? Ask any former child star: Judy Garland, Baby Peggy, Gary Coleman, Britney Spears. What happens is when the brand collapses, the identity collapses with it. Let's talk about learned helplessness. This comes from Martin Seligman's work in the 1960s. When someone learns their actions don't change the outcomes, they stop trying. Influencer kids learn you can't opt out. The filming happens anyway. You can't control what's posted because it goes up anyway. And you can't stop strangers from commenting because they're going to do it anyway. Eventually, the child becomes passive, quiet, compliant, not because they're well behaved, but because they've learned resistance is useless. That's not good content, that's psychological resignation. Donald Winnicott's concept is tragically relevant here. The false self forms when a child must perform an identity to say safe or loved. Influencer kids develop the YouTube version of themselves, or the Instagram version of themselves, or the sponsor friendly version of themselves. And these are ultimately masks. But the real self, the messy, emotional, contradictory, developing self, doesn't get screen time. The false self becomes the only self. Adults spend decades in therapy unraveling this. For these kids, it starts at age 3. So imagine if your entire childhood, every tantrum, every birthday, every awkward moment was filmed, edited, monetized, and stored in an archive that strangers can replay forever. Now, imagine the person holding the camera is the person you're supposed to trust the most. That's not just a boundary violation, that's developing brain that's being shaped around surveillance. 100 years after Jackie Coogan lost his millions, kids are still working without choosing to. Baby Pecky was lit on fire on set. Judy Garland was chemically managed like a lab experiment. Britney Spears was hunted until she broke. Influencer kids are filmed in their own bedrooms without the concept of privacy. Different terminology, different platforms, same cultural hunger. So we end a century asking the same question: how many more cautionary tales do we need before we actually change who we protect and who we watch burn? Every time we tell ourselves we've learned, we've passed the Coogan Law, we put teachers on set. Now we're writing rules for YouTube, and yet history keeps handing us the receipts because Here's the truth: you can't legislate away greed. You can't regulate ambition out of parents who see their kid as the golden ticket. You can't make fame any less intoxicating. And if there's one thing Hollywood and now social media has taught us, it's this: childhood isn't a renewable resource. Once it's gone, and no amount of ad revenue or box office numbers will buy it back. Thanks for listening to This Again. I just want to take a moment to say that the support I've received on this project so far has far exceeded my expectations. And I am so genuinely grateful for each time you guys listen and spend a little bit of time with me. So thank you very much. And happy holidays to you and yours. I'll see you next time.